We bring about 40 gang members in, but the lever to bring them in is that they get to be on parole or probation. That's the only way we can get them to see us. We ask for volunteers. Once in a while, we do have a volunteer that comes in, but that's a rare circumstance. Once we have the gang call in, you give the messages as far as put the guns down, we care about you. The superintendent of police speaks to them. The chief of patrol speaks to them. Then we have the U.S. attorney and the state's attorney speak with them. And the consequences, everything starts now. The slate is clean. We know what you've done in the past. But going into the future, we're speaking to all the gang members in the room. And we're talking through you to go back to your gangs and put down the guns, stop the violence. Because if you don't, these are going to be the consequences. And the first gang, after this meeting's over, goes out and shoots or kills somebody, that's the first gang that raised their hands. And because we have so many gangs in the city, I told you 57 parent gangs and 650 factions, raise your hand. We'll put all our priorities on you. So that's how we start to prioritize. We have good police work. We do identify gangs in districts that are involved in immediate violence, long-term investigations. But for this process, we take a look at them, and sure enough, we have the moral voice of the community, and then we also have the option of social services that we can get into later during this conversation. After that's done, one of them will commit violence out there. And then we have to have the credibility to make sure that we stay good by our word. Because if we don't have the credibility of identifying that gang that committed the violence, then we've kind of lost this whole process. After that's done, we go out and we do an enforcement action. We bring them back in, all the gang members, so everybody can see which gang didn't heed the warnings, raised their hand, and they committed violence. And we show them what we've done as far as the prosecution and the gangs. We said, some of you stayed out of violence. This is the gang that's going away, and this is exactly what's happened. And these other options are still on board for you. But we want them to go back to their gang members. It doesn't have to be that gang member that's at the call-in. Once that person goes back out, he has to give the word out to another gang member, and we let that gang know you were represented at a call-in. And because of that, if the word did not go out, we don't care. It's group accountability. But having just parolees and having 40 gang members, sometimes the message doesn't get out. And here's the thing. We actually want to target people in the community that are causing violence. So we said, what can we do next? So I think late in 2013, we started systematically saying, hey, how can we get to the messages to the people we know they're involved in violence, that are influences, but they're not on parole or probation? Let's start doing custom notifications. Let's start gearing them where we give the same message, but it's a personal message. And even if that person's not there, we're giving it to the family. And we can let them know through a system that we put in place. Andrew Papachristos, if you take a look at his work, social network analysis. And through this, we can identify individuals that's 700 to 800 times more likely to be a victim of murder than the average citizen in Chicago. And we can do this with great certainty from what we put together in our process, but that's for another discussion. If you're going to be at IACP, we'll be giving a presentation with Dr. Miles Warnick from IIT, Jonathan Lewin, the Deputy Chief, and myself, and we can get into how we identify these individuals. Before this discussion, we use that tool big time to identify our individuals, and we don't necessarily have to rely on that tool. If a person of influence, we know there's a hot gang conflict going back and forth, we know who the leaders of that gang are. We'll go out and make a immediate custom notification to see if we can stop the violence between the gangs. Now, this doesn't replace the good police work that we do, identifying who's involved in it, doing our enforcement, cops on the dot, identifying associates of the victim to make sure we get to them before the retaliation, but it just helps supplement the process that we have in place. And because of that, I think that's the way we've been going, and it doesn't necessarily have to be systematic. We turned out it can be systematic, at the same time it can be immediate, and we found there's a nice balance between them, and we've gotten ahead of we got ahead of some of this violence immediately, and some of the retaliatory shootings we don't necessarily eradicate them, but we put some time between them and a cooling off process, and that's huge to slow down some of the violence and the shootings, so our other tactics can take place. I think how we came to it, when we systematically were doing the customs, Chris, we went to the 10th district, and we evolved from systematic and saw in the 10th district, when we got to these gang members, that were in immediate conflict, that conflict went away, and we say, hey, we're onto something. Let's not do it systematically. Let's get this out there immediately. It's some of the things that as we grow, if something works, let's do more of it. And let's change things up to see if they do work. If it works, do more of it. If it doesn't work, let's go back to the drawing board and see what else we can do to help reduce violence.
Chief Sumner?
The custom notification for us is in a couple of different forms. And I will tell you this, when we started call-ins in 1998, we were doing them one at a time. And then somebody said, wow, why don't we pull like 20 of these guys in instead of doing it one at a time? So this has really come full circle for us. So the idea is not new, but it's a newer application. So we first used it, and when I say custom for us, it's a letter, a specific letter that says you came to the attention of the task force. We reviewed your record of offending. If you commit a new, and we pretty much we're focusing in on an act of gun violence, possession of a firearm by a felon. We list out the certain things. If you have a new one of these offenses, this is a presumptive sentence that you can expect. Because what we're really doing is raising their personal risk estimate. We found out the guys in High Point, they have no idea what they've done. They don't remember everything they've done. And they have no idea of calculating how much time they're risking to pick the gun up. So what we're really doing is getting in front of them as quickly as possible and let them know, here's what you're actually risking. That does impact them. We used the legal notification. Our district attorney will review their record and say, based on his record and Fair Sentencing Act, here's what his presumptive sentences are. They put it in a letter. We deliver. We deliver with a High Point Community Against Violence member and maybe a clergy. And we deliver where we find them, and we give them that message. We use it in the domestic violence call-in. They get one of those letters before they leave, because I found that bunch really don't know what they've done. And they think if they didn't get any active time for it, it doesn't count. So you got to list them out. We have used it extensively to prevent a retaliatory act of violence. And it's more reactive. Everybody can't wait for 3 months for a call-in. You got to get in front of some of these guys right now that you know is going to be carrying a gun tomorrow to retaliate. So I literally have a unit that after we have a shooting, you got this violent crime unit working on solving that case. The strategic intel is working on who's going to be likely to retaliate. Let's pull their records and let's get them a custom notification to make sure they understand we're going to handle this. And oh, by the way, we're expecting you to carry a gun. Here's what your exposure is. We use it for group maintenance. Once you've had a group call in, kind of what you're describing, you're going to get new members of the group. Maybe new actors come into play, or one of the members of the group had to be sanctioned, and you want to make sure the rest of them get that message, and you want to up the ante for them to tell them what their exposure is. So it's a good way to use it too. And last year, just for entertainment purposes, the property crime unit said, what if we use custom notifications to like deter chronic shoplifting? And I asked a few questions, and they said, yeah, we can identify those guys and girls up front. So we sent out 20 custom legal notifications to chronic shoplifters, and then found a way to notify new shoplifters of what was going to happen. And lo and behold, we had about a 35% decrease in shoplifting last year. So not only will it work on violence, I have found and convinced ourselves it can work on some other things too.
Chief Fletcher?
It's really hard to add much to the discussion after these two, since we learned how to do customs from Chief Tracy in Chicago, and we're able to surpass them as the #1 city. And actually, he says the #1 mid-sized city. Sorry, Chief. And we're basically reorganizing our department largely off of what Chief Sumner and the folks at High Point have done to weave everything we do. So it's sort of hard to expound upon the basics of what they do, but I can tell you a couple things that we have found, or I have found. I've been doing this for about a year in Chattanooga, and I can tell you things that I have found, maybe not unique, but meaningful to me, which is the ability to address influentials, family members, is hard to underestimate. That especially the younger the group member is, the more effective that seems to be. I had very, very good luck with that with the drug market intervention in Austin, and I had 100% turnout rate of influentials at our call-in, and we're working very hard to reach out to family members on every single custom that we do. And we go beyond that. We try to reach out to the neighborhood where we're doing the custom. So we spend a little time in the neighborhood when we do the customs, and we tell the neighbors and the people around there what we're doing and why we're there, to the point that we now go out and do customs, and almost routinely, another young man in the neighborhood will come up to us and say, "Where's my packet?" Because they want to be part of the process, and we take time to talk to them about that. One of the most important things we've done is copy High Point and really create a robust and getting robuster intelligence unit, because the quality of the packet is everything. They are shocked by how much that we know about them. The more pictures, the more evidence, the more their friends you're going to put in there, the more impressed they are. And these guys will attest, when you hand them the packet, they act like they don't care. They try not to look at it, and if you intentionally sort of give them some space, they'll start flipping through it, like they obviously want to know what's in there. And if you give them enough space, they'll start showing things to their buddies that are hanging around, and it's clearly impactful. So the more intelligence you can get and the more quickly you can get it, the better off. The only thing I'll add that these guys didn't add is about the preparation. I think one of the things that Chattanooga has gotten really good at is the template and the rapid response of preparing a custom packet. And we're able to put together a pretty robust packet in a very, very short time, and that's very, very impactful to the folks. And the last thing I'll add is that we are trying to, like Chief Sumner, we're trying to find ways to do this. And I'll echo something he said at the last panel when I was watching him. I'm the chief of police in Chattanooga because of David Kennedy and focused deterrence. I decided I wanted to be a chief of police because this is an important part of the way I think policing will be done in the 21st century. And I came to a city where it was already being embraced. So if it were not for guys like this that paved the way and David Kennedy, I wouldn't be doing it. So I feel a very strong impetus to apply what I believe is the right way to do policing everywhere we can. And like many of your jurisdictions, we really struggle with juvenile crime. I know these guys do. A lot of focused deterrence is based on building swift, sure response, building on previous convictions. And with juveniles, that just doesn't happen. So one of the things I don't know if we've talked about this before, but one of the things we're doing is trying to find a way to use focused deterrence for juveniles who do not have the records to build on. And what we're going to do is we're rolling out a chronic offender program, and we are going to piggyback on that with juvenile offenders, and we're going to identify our most at-risk juvenile offenders within 6 months of reaching majority. And we are going to go to them and say, listen, we know what you've been doing, and show them their whole packet, which obviously we can show them. And we're going to give them custom notifications. Can't get them a call in, really. And we're going to tell them, we know what you've been doing. You have a unique opportunity to start over. And then we're going to show them what happens to people who are 18 years old or who get adjudicated as an adult, the ones who get no bonds for non-capital murders. And we're going to try to deter them in a very focused manner in the months before they turn 18, because it's the last chance they got. Once they turn 18 and they get that conviction and we come after them, they're going to jail for a long time. So we're really excited about customizing our customs for a hard-to-reach demographic of our population.
Thank you. So starting out with customs is definitely something, I like what Chief Fletcher said, a way of thinking about this is going to be incorporated in policing for the 21st century. Changing, and change, resistance to change. I know when we began, you'd see hashtag hug a thug, so there's some concerns, this is hug a thug. There's some concerns, is all you're doing is talking to them. Why are you talking to them? You need to be putting the steel bracelets on them. This is too soft. This is soft on crime, all those types of concerns. So the first part of my question is initially, what did you think? Just honestly, we're in a safe space here, other than the video camera running and recording everything you say. Well, what did you and your troops think when you started out with custom notifications and presented the concept of custom notifications? That's the first part of the question. And then I will refer to the second part of the question is, Woody Hayes, I'm not a Buckeye, but I do appreciate great coaches. Woody Hayes famously said to one of his assistant coaches who had come back from a scouting trip at Purdue, and he showed up at Ohio State in Columbus at like 2 in the morning, and Hayes was in there waiting for him. And he said, we got Purdue this weekend, let's see what you got. And he said, well, Coach, I think, and he said, no. He said, well, Coach, I think, and he put up both his hands and he said, son, I don't care about what you think. I need to know what you know. So I think it's important. Sometimes what we think is not always as important as what we know. So the second part of my question, see, I'm going to wiggle football in this thing anyway and every way I can. But the second part of my question is simply, what do you now know? So what did you think and what did the troops think coming in about custom notifications? What was the initial response? And now what do you know and what do the troops know? What have you seen? We're going to start with Chief Fletcher.
Well, first I'd paraphrase from Yoda, who said it a little bit better than Coach Hayes, which is, there is no try, only do. And my first reaction is that this combined what I believe to be my pillars of policing strategy, which are customs really get to the essence of three things that I think are vital to policing, which are community-oriented policing, problem-oriented policing, intelligence-led / data-driven policing, and focused deterrence. A custom incorporates all of the elements of all of those strategies on the ground with the people who are most at risk. So when I first heard about them, when I first did one, I thought this is fantastic. It incorporates the things we're learning about here today. It really builds procedural justice and really incorporates legitimacy into what you're doing. Nothing addresses PJ better than telling people what the boundaries are before you enforce them. It really speaks to that. So as a police executive, as a senior police officer, it really, really resonated with me. My police officers had the exact opposite response. They were like the rest of your police officers. And I can sum that up best in a quote my wife uses all the time, which is, our police officers knew that gangs were out of control and that gang violence was up and gun violence was off the hook. But my wife always says, people want things to improve, they just don't want things to change. And that was my officers. They knew that we had to do something, but we didn't want to try new things. And that probably persisted until we had one young man who was involved in a shooting, and we had a very tentative witness, a very, very weak witness. And we went and did customs, and I finally said enough is enough, and I went to court. And I showed up in court to make sure that this guy got a bond. And my presence there drove media cameras there, which drove a judge to address the young man in a very interesting way. And this young man, for a non-capital crime, got 2 no bonds and a stern lesson from the judge that went viral nationwide. And the officers realized then that this was about support and accountability, and not support or accountability, or not just support, but accountability was an equal part of it. And it's an equal part of the message. We're giving you the message, here's what we will do for you, here's what we will do to you if you don't let us. And I think they're coming around, but their coming around has pertinence to the questions that you guys don't see here, which Chris has shared with us, and I'll weave those into the future questions.
Chief Tracy?
You know, I echo the sentiments of Chief Fletcher. There's skepticism, and with change, you have to take a look at it. And so people are exposed to it, and even executives in police departments. You want to make sure, you want to look at the results, and I'm driven by results analysis, so I always keep an open mind, but I'll never undermine a new strategy. If it fails on its own. If it succeeds on it with the support. And the support, it fails with the support, I'm sorry. That's the way you gotta look at everything. And that's what I always tell the officers going into something. We're not gonna undermine this strategy. And if it doesn't work, we'll take a good look at it and see why. If we have to tweak it, we'll work on it. If it doesn't work, we're gonna stop doing it and find something else that we can work. So you give them that promise, and you let them know, but you have to understand this, and you gotta start with the executives up top, that they have an understanding, and then make sure everybody below them has the same understanding. And we do this through a ComStat process, and we actually bring it up in ComStat, where I was on another panel, and I say ComStat's not about outputs, it's about outcomes. And we talk about strategies. We talk about are we doing the strategy correct? Because sometimes, if you look at different districts, I said 11 districts are doing gang callings, and 18 districts are doing custom notifications at 22. If we don't do it consistent and do it right, we're going to get it wrong. And it gets bastardized when people think they know it works or how it works without an understanding. So There's skepticism because it doesn't work, and sometimes it's not, it's the understanding and the execution that's not working. Once the officers start to see this, and some of the results that come in, when they're exposed, even from senior management, they start to get an understanding of what's going on. And I found when that happens, we start to get the buy-in. And because of this, and seeing some of the results, and especially expanding to the custom notifications, that's as good as stopping someone in the street, but we're actually offering alternatives in conjunction with the community, offering services, letting the people know that we custom notify, that this is what we care about you. And the community's going with us, and the family members are sitting there. And if he's not there, we speak to the family members. You know, that's successful customer notification. If we can speak to someone that might have some influence, or someone cares about them, that resonates in the community. If the police officer showed up at my door, a commander shows up at my door, with the stakeholder in the community and support services, they came here to help my son, even though he's been involved, son or daughter, even though they've been involved in crime. That resonates in the community, that feeds into procedural justice, police legitimacy, Chief Fletcher talked about, and that skepticism we can slowly erode. It's always going to be there with every new strategy, but it's our job to continue, show the results, and keep moving forward despite some naysayers.
Chief Sumner?
I'll confess, David suggested this to me 10 years ago. He suggested it twice since then, and I underestimated the power of it. Didn't really give it as much thought, and I should listen to Dave by now. He's proven to be right so many times. When we finally did start using this, because it's so much more flexible than a formal call-in, and it makes sense. If you think about it, just cops go on a call, what do? You go out there on a noise call and you say, hey, if I come back out here again, somebody's getting a ticket, and by the way, I know you're responsible for the place. You just did a custom notification. We've been using this for years. We didn't know what to call it. So it made sense to me, hey, this is a real law enforcement tactic. We should incorporate it in the way we do business. Formalizing it with a letter does this for you that I've seen so far. Number one, like you mentioned, at a bond hearing, it's nice to be able to say, Your Honor, we went out there with members of the family, and they delivered a letter to this guy, and they told him what his record was and asked him to stand down. I've heard that at bond hearings. That does not help them. Court, how about this? I have seen my DAs use this at closing argument when they're talking about sentences. Hey, Your Honor, they went out there, the community went with us, we gave this guy this letter, put him on notice. That doesn't help them either. But the other thing I've seen it happen is, especially with young ones, shootings back and forth, we get out there, we get in front of the family, and we custom notify the offenders or the targets in front of family, and I'm able to say, make sure you understand what this is. This is my official notice to him and to you, because whenever that shooting takes place next week and everybody's going, oh my God, why didn't we do something to prevent this? Or you're trying to say, well, why did this happen to my son? I'm going to say, Mama, we were here last week. We were here and I got it documented. That changes the way people think a little bit, and I underestimated how much impact that would have on them. But if you think about it, it would make sense, because, you know, we all give warnings, and the follow-through is the key. I will tell you that. If you do one of these, you're going to have a way to track it, and you want to make sure that you follow through. So the same thing works with kids. My kid, I'll tell you this funny, we're laughing. He's taking a bath, he's splashing water out of the tub. I go in there and I said, hey, don't splash no more water out of that tub. He goes, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to spank you. He looks up at me and says, with the belt or with your hand? He's trying to weigh his risk. I said, it don't matter. It's going to be till you can't catch your breath and you got snot bubbles. Don't worry about it. But it absolutely works.
As you could clearly see here, that's why we refer to these things as strategies. It's nothing new. You know, many of us can attest to learning the lesson from our fathers and mothers that, you know, daddy's belt does more than hold up his pants. You know, we knew that, you know, and it was an effective deterrent. In no way am I trying to endorse corporal punishment or anything like that. You know, just the effectiveness of certain strategies on most people. But what I will say is this, in dialogues that I've had about corporal punishment, the paddle, that type of stuff, my experience was, you know, you go into the coaches or the dean or the principal's office and you just had one die or a pair of dice laying there on the table. And then you get ready to roll. Anybody remember that? Anybody have to do it? You rolled. And whatever you rolled is what you ended up getting. That was the justice that was meted out to you. But I think at the end of the day, we fondly laugh about that and remember that, because at the end of the day, we knew that dean, we knew that coach, we knew that principal loved us. We knew that they loved us, they were invested in us, and that made a big difference in that. So, to venture off of how we discipline our children in High Point, North Carolina, come back to the panel.
deterrent message worked. I didn't have to do it.
I discipline my kids that way, I'm not going to lie. So Andy Papachristos talks a lot about, when he talks about social network analysis, he talks about changing networks and how that's not easy. That even if you take down a group and have a federal indictment on 35, 40 gang members, why is the gang still there operating? Why does it resurrect itself? Why are these same persistent problems in the community? And he talks a lot about the changing the network versus changing the behaviors in the network. And I think that's what we really get at with this strategy and with custom notifications. We know that we're not going to deceive ourselves and think that everybody's going to come along kumbaya now. You know, we're not necessarily sure why they'll stop the behavior. We have good ideas, but we don't know how much of it is an offer for support, a threat of indictment or investigation, or where that deterrence is coming from, or just a simple message from the community that they're loved and valued. So in changing those behaviors, all of your jurisdictions, you partner with community members, outreach and support agencies with regards to custom notifications. And there is an offer of support, which we haven't really heard much about right now. Can you talk a little bit about your partnership with community members, outreach and support agencies as it relates to delivering and follow-up with custom notifications? And we'll start with Chief Sumner.
We have a great partnership. We have a superb support network with the High Point Community Against Violence. I can call them or email Jim Summey, and he will drop everything he's doing and grab maybe a service provider or a minister, and they'll be at the police department in a matter of a couple hours, and we'll be off to make notifications. And I'll tell you why that's really key. Law enforcement can do it, but they expect us to say that. When the service provider or a community member or a clergy goes with you, I have found that the family members connect with them almost immediately. And even if the person getting the message doesn't reach out, mama or uncle might reach back out to the Community Against Violence for help. Hey, I've been trying to work with him and he's not really getting the message. So I have seen them make that personal connection with the influentials. I find that very valuable. And we've got a core group who are very responsive, and they're willing to drop what they're doing and go with us at almost a moment's notice.
Chief Tracy.
Same thing in High Point. We have the same thing in Chicago. And actually, Chris and his team, Deb Higgins and Tom Hurley, they're in the back of the room, they actually do a wonderful job. We have the benefit of a great team that goes out over 700 attempts and almost 400 completed custom notifications, over 400. And it's done by this team in conjunction with our commanders and some of the community support. The community support, what you got to make sure is that they understand the message, because when you have the call in, you have one person you have to give the message to. We're using multiple people in the community, and they have to be on the same page of what we're trying to accomplish. Chris and his team educate them what we're trying to do. We vet them, and these are people that'll give their time to help their community. And just like in High Point, they make a great connection when we're there to deliver the message. We can go into detail, but just having them on first impression as a person that's respected and known in the community, and that they're in partnership with us, is invaluable. And we're going to continue to do that. We actually want to release Chris, Deb, and Tom, because to do that amount and do the other work that they're doing, we kind of want to, they want to be trained the trainers, pull themselves out, find these community members, working with the police department and working with our social services to free them up to continue all the good work that we're doing in Chicago. So that's our next base that we're going with, but it's invaluable to have the community there and the first impression when you walk up to that door.
Chief Fletcher.
Again, it's pretty hard to add anything. I will just say that at my city we have a department head. Some of you may have met him already, is Dr. Paul Smith, and he does a lot like Chris does. He is the director of public safety, but what he is the director of support and outreach. And I consider him a peer, and I think having him at the top of the organizational chart at the city in that role sends a very strong message that those services are important and they're vital and they're funded. And we provide the services through a outside vendor. We actually have a contracted item with an advocacy group in the community that provides social services and social service network. And we contract with them, and somebody from our department, usually Paul, Dr. Smith, a police officer, which we'll get to later, we're rolling further down the chain of command as we get further into custom notifications. Somebody from our support group, our social services group, and we've trained a group of non-paid community members, folks that represent the community, to go out with us as well. One of the challenges you'll have is, these guys will probably echo this, is you don't want a ponderous group of people, that you can overwhelm people with too many people on a custom. You're going into their house and onto their home turf, and there's a delicate line between involving the right voices and bringing too many people. It can feel a little overwhelming and intimidating to people who don't know what's going on. So it's important to balance that line. One of the things we're trying to do is, we start at the top. I believe in modeling vision and values from the top and then pushing it down and not expecting people to do things that we're not modeling. So we spent the last year with my assistant chief of investigations going on every single customs. Now they're weaving in an expectation that the commanders and the zone commanders respond with them. Then the next step will be to bring patrol supervisors and patrol officers, because this is not a program. It is a strategy and a philosophy that we want to weave into the next 17 years of everything we do, just like Chief Sumner and High Point.
Right, and getting, piggybacking off of Chief Fletcher's comment of it not being a program or initiative, but it's actually a strategy, looking at best practices, looking at evidence-based. You know, one of the things that we're very focused upon, and we insist and demand upon, is that when we do custom notifications, whoever that community member is delivering that custom, there's one point of contact. There's not 12 or 13, or you call me and I'll send you this guy, or someone else jumps in and I jump in, and Fred is the outreach and support person, but I give you my business card as the commander because I feel moved for some reason. And it's one point of contact, and then that one point of contact ushers that person essentially into case management, may case manage them themselves depending on their place in that community, and it's local folks, it's trusted folks. You know, it's really what we found, it's not the actual custom notification and the offer for help, it's the authenticity of the offer for help. If they think you really give a care about this thing and that you are sincere and authentic in your outreach towards them, it becomes a game changer. They may not take the help. In fact, when we began doing this, we've only been doing this for 2 years, so you know, you figure out the math. Deb, can you raise your hand in the back there? It's Deb Higgins, works on it with our staff. I think Tom is in another session right now. We have Randall Strickland, who's just joined our staff. He'll be focusing on the custom notifications. But the stats that Chief Tracy gave, that's in less than 2 years. The second week in July will make 2 years since we've been doing custom notifications in Chicago. My hat's off, and I thank Chief Sumner. We actually picked this up from Marty and his folks. We actually went to High Point and did a peer visit. It was invaluable. We tweaked it to what works for our jurisdiction, which I encourage you all to do. You know, stick with the big game plan, but you know, we're all a little bit different in who we're dealing with and how we have to deal with them. But that offer of help also, who does it extend to? You know, in Chicago, we extend that offer of help, not just to the individuals, but to their family members. As a father of 4, my wife will tell you, I can despise Randall Strickland. Sorry, Randall. I could despise Randall Strickland. But if Randall does something for one of our 4 boys, he will always have a seat at our kitchen table. He will always have a seat in our house because he did something for one of our boys. It's no different. And that's just, you know, one of the greatest things that I learned from David Kennedy 5 years ago was that a common mistake we make in this arena is we assume everyone to be a gangbanger is a sociopath, you know, but the vast majority of the cohorts that we work with are logical, rational thinking human beings. Hence the effectiveness of the custom notification when you come in. And our data, we were also told that nationally about 10% of these guys would pick up for help. We've had almost 23% of the guys reach out to us right after the custom notification at their house. And it's really been a great bridge builder and really closed the gap between community and law enforcement. you know, because we need to consider that as well with reconciliation and other things, because whatever your thoughts are going in about the individual, hug a thug, why I gotta knock on the door, this is ridiculous, and then all of a sudden 15 minutes later, Deb's phone rings in the car with the commander and the guy's reaching out for help. We've had guys who weren't home weren't present and call from Mexico because they got a custom notification and wanted to know what this is about. It's something a little bit different. And God help you, if your social service partners and your outreach partners are on their A game, it changes the entire paradigm. Because now they know law enforcement is going to respond a certain way, quickly, efficiently, effectively. They're going to keep their promise. But can our outreach and support side of the community deliver the same promises? Can we come through and get you at the top of the list and get you in a meeting within 24 to 72 hours from the day we knock on your door and talk to you and follow through? Not promising anyone anything, but can we get that done? And I'm glad to say we had 23% of our guys, it's 451 individuals, but over 500 visits. But out of 451 guys, 23% of them have reached out for help. We also extend the offer to family. God bless my wife, because how many Diamonds and Shaniquas and whoever else has called my house at 11 o'clock at night, asking for something about housing, because what's going on here? What's going on here is you have someone who's had children with one individual but may have other children, but the house is being shot up because they're looking for the guy that we did the custom on. But he's not there, but the rest of the family is there. And now there's a venue, there's an avenue, and then now you start to build that network within your community. And you can see how law enforcement empowers the community, empowers the social service agencies, the outreach agencies, the schools. Now all of a sudden everyone networks in, and you have an opportunity to take this custom notification tool to reduce violence and actually build upon it in building up a community a little bit and bringing people back together and having that voice. And then I'll say our numbers actually go up to close to 30%. I think it's about 27, 28% when you add associates. So we make the offer to the individual, to their family members, but also to any associates. And one of the chiefs that mentioned it earlier, there's some bravado right there on the spot. I think it was Chief Fletcher when they're showing the pictures and give them a little bit of space. There's bravado on the spot. They'll MF you. They'll tell you to get out of here. This is not necessary. I don't need your help, so on and so forth. Very small number of them, but then they'll call you like Nicodemus in the night and say, hey, I got 7. We had one guy brought 7 guys to us, and it was not all altruistic. These were 7 guys he thought were going to rat him out at some point. He didn't have trust them. What works, right? What works? That's what we're here to discuss. Chief Tracy and Marty and Fred, you guys talked about speaking with family members and how important it is when you talk with family members. And I have my own view on that, which I'll share if we have time towards the end. Also, we talked about self-selection. This is something where, you look at in an age where there's always a concern of profiling. Why are you picking on my kids? We're getting ready to start juvenile customs, and we had some meetings with some folks, and they were saying to us, their main concern was, hey, you know what? I don't like what you're getting ready to do. I don't like that you're going to bring police commanders to our kids' houses and knock on the doors and identify them and label them. But the reality that we all know is that if little Johnny takes off his T-shirt, he's labeled himself like 6 or 7 times with body art already. He labels himself on his notebook and with the tags he puts on. And as you saw earlier with the social media pages. So it's really not about labeling anybody. The label's already there, and it's self-selection. That's why we're here. Chief Tracy talked about, and Chief Fletcher, these are the drivers of the violence, so it's self-selection. But in looking at speaking with family members, the opportunity to talk and engage, what a great venue to begin engaging on profiling. And really now you get into racial profiling versus criminal profiling, those types of, now these conversations, how do you start that conversation? It's easy for me to start it. I'm black, right? I can say whatever I really want to say sometimes. But how do any of our respective chiefs here begin that conversation with community members? It's kind of like an awkward, want to get away moment, Southwest Airlines. But looking at the strengths and areas of improvement, Can you identify where are you strongest right now, and where do you think that you have areas of improvement with regards to your custom notification process? I'll start with Chief Fletcher.
All right. First, let me share a little anecdote to support what Chris was saying. Our guys went to do a custom on a young man who was an adult, but just barely. And the parents were the only ones there, and they said, my son's not in a gang. There's no way he's in a gang. And my officers said, well, let us look around his room, and we'll show you things that might lead you to believe that we're right. And they said, you know what, there won't be any action out of what we find. And they got consent to search the room. They found several weapons, weed, crack, scales, and pictures of him and his friends engaging in gang activity. And the parents were stunned, and they did a 180. They went from defending their son to saying they would do anything they could to keep him out of violence. And to this date, that son has not been involved in violence again. And it also speaks to another area that's sort of woven into the answer to this question, which is, this is a good way to develop the kind of cops that you want, is they're learning while they're giving the message. These cops found drugs, guns, and money, the Holy Trinity in a room, and they understood the long game. Their job was to keep this person from shooting somebody else. And they realized that instead of enforcing that, they could have arrested mom and dad for that stuff in their house. They understood the long game was that when we deter a crime, we save a victim and we save the life of the suspect, right? And they realized they could do more good by diverting this person from that path than by some enforcement that might or might not get back to them. So I say that to say one of the real strengths is, as you get officers involved in this conversation and telling people things, they're also hearing it themselves. And they're becoming the kind of procedurally just police officers, the type of legitimate police officers that we want them to be. And they're doing it without a didactic lesson. We're not standing up in front of them and saying, do this, do this, do this. It's subliminal. We're having them tell the rules and the consequences and follow up on them, and they're becoming the kind of officers we want them to be. Just to answer the actual question, I'll say that I would like to be able to do more of that. One of our opportunities is to start pushing down these values and this behavior beyond our specialized units. We have a gang task force. We call them street crimes, just like a lot of you all have. And my director of public safety and my assistant chief of investigations and a couple select commanders do the bulk of this. The next iteration, version 2.0, is to weave in the zone people, the district people, the beat officers, so that they start having those conversations, and it changes the conversation and the dynamic on the street level and on the call and on the contact level. As far as strengths, I'll say that we have for a small department who just created an intelligence unit based on the High Point model, we have a really, really good ability to provide meaningful intelligence in a short time frame, and it almost always surprises and impresses the folks that we're trying to surprise and impress.
Chief Tracy.
One of the fortunate things of it being on this panel, you can see the passion with Chris Mallette, and what a great partner. He's actually answered some of this question already, but I'll try to go over some of the things where we can improve. And where we can improve is ensuring that the officers and the commanders understand what the end game is. And I think Chief Fletcher hit that. It's the end game, the end goal of driving down violence alternatively other than arrest. And if we can get that in their mind, not discretion on the street when you see something happen, but the end game when you're dealing with parents, you're working with the community, and then you start to gain their trust because you're in it together. That's where we need to improve. We need to get more of our officers involved with the understanding, because it's a force multiplier. Because we don't want to expand too quick. We want to do more of this, but we want to make sure we do it right. So they have to have the understanding that we're sending the right message and we're delivering the right message when we're dealing with the families of some of these potential victims or offenders in violence.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Sumner.
I think our strength is we use it regularly. Someone is actually looking for it every time we do an instant review of a criminal act. So that's really good. It's very formalized. And one of the things I think is a weakness or a great area of improvement is we haven't systematically used this. We will when I get back. You know, we have the call-in, and there's a very strict set of criteria for a call-in, and we have notifications based off of incidents, but there's always that level of offender who falls just short of qualifying for a call-in, but they might be hot in the street anyways, and so I'm gonna be looking at taking that list that didn't quite make the cut and do some custom notifications with them, because I think that's an area where we can expand what we've already done. It occurs to me that's a good place.
Thank you. Chief Tracy, you talked about ComStat with the Chicago Police Department and how custom notifications are part of ComStat, really getting into the issue of accountability in measuring these things and looking at what we're doing. The question for the panel, and I'll start with Chief Tracy here, is how have you woven custom notification principles and practices into department policies and standard operating procedures?
Well, first of all, we started out with an academic paper that spells out exactly what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish, and the steps that and the protocols we want in place to ensure that it's done uniformly across the city. Then we have general orders that actually shorten it, but I want them to see the academic paper to get more of an explanation of what we're trying to accomplish. You got to follow up with training. Everybody needs to know what you're doing. We have in-service training for everyone in the department on these concepts of what we're trying to accomplish. If they don't have education, understand what we're trying to do, and I'm saying even from the executives down to the police officers in the street, then we're not going to be successful. And then the third part is second part is implementation. How we implement it, we're doing it slowly, incrementally, working out the kinks and making sure that everybody has an understanding as we go through it, and then as we move it to the next district, they'll come along and watch how it's done, and they'll be first with call-ins, and then with custom notifications. We'll have two commanders and some people from their district. They don't go inside to overwhelm the family. We talked about that as well. We're going to their home as a guest. They'll stand outside, but they get the understanding of how the process works, and then the execution of it and the follow-up. Well, that's where ComStat comes in. ComStat isn't just a meeting that we have every week. It's a philosophy and a process that we do in the Chicago Police Department to ensure that we always have follow-up and critique on how each one's going, the results, the analysis. Are we being successful? And if we're not being successful, are we doing it right? Are we missing something? And the numbers keep coming in, and we're taking a look at an evaluation of the process. We just talked amongst the chiefs here to try to make it uniform, the way we report our process, so we can compare through analysis between the cities. Are we in a good place? Are we having an effect on the violence? How many people are signing up for social services? How many people are being shot after we custom notify them? The percentages? How many people are arrested for violent crime after that? So we have the numbers. It's not part of your, the question yet, but we've done 763 notifications. We're coming up on attempts on 763 custom notifications, coming up on 2 years. These were attempts. 481 were successful on the person. We probably had over 500 successful custom notifications, but some people who went out and said hello to twice. Out of those individuals, 29 of them were at call-ins. 113, Chris, I think we talked about maybe 27% about 27% have asked for services and support. And I talked about 28 have been shooting victims, and 52 of them have been arrested for violent crimes. I don't know where that compares. These are individuals that are at high risk to begin with. So I have nothing to compare it to right now. The numbers are small, but are they good or bad? And I think that's probably the next process, even getting together as the chiefs of these cities that are doing it and part of the national network. Maybe during the evaluation process, these are some of the numbers they can use to see if we're being successful or not.
Thank you. Chief Sumner?
The national network has a really good implementation guide on their website. So I'll give you just a couple of other ways that we formalize it. Yes, it's in the SOP. Yes, Strategic Intel uses it every day. The other units now go out of the way to identify people, like your violent crime unit reads a lot of reports. And if they've got somebody who is otherwise involved on that report and a witness to this violent crime, they're hot in the street. And they will forward those names over there so they can do a workup on them and do a custom. Also, think about pretrial release. Pretrial release services, they're going to know a whole lot about some of these folks. Maybe you want to get in front of them before they go back out in the street. Maybe you want to get back in front of them before they come off probation. We work with probation to identify some folks that need to be. And then last, that I think really has worked, and I don't have any data on it yet, but we started specifically using it in the schools. The SROs are thinking about, how do you notify these kids that we know are hot? Some of them may be involved in gang activity. We know it's going to take place outside the school, but it started here. And that's a really easy place to get a parent to come by and pick them up, and you use it in the school for the kids. So just some thoughts there.
Chief Fletcher?
Actually, that reminded me of something we just started a couple weeks ago. Our SROs are obviously not in the schools for the summer, and we have assigned them to our street crimes unit, and they're going out helping our street crimes, our gang guys, get to know the juvenile players better than they would otherwise, and they're also learning the language and the dynamic of the customs. So they're going to be riding with street crimes all summer, and then they're going to take those lessons back and do exactly what Chief Sumner said in the school. Same thing as these guys are doing. The only thing that I would add is we are actively working on incorporating the knowledge, the understanding, the appreciation, and the use of these strategies and these principles into your selection for any assignment in our police department and for your promotion in our department. The textbooks all tell you to put in your evaluations. I don't know about your departments, but the ones where I've been, evaluations don't matter. I mean, they're pieces of paper that don't really go into anything. But people care about specialized assignments, and they care about promoting. And what you value in those, people will do. So we're going to make sure that focus deterrence, that things of being involved in addressing gang and gun violence and being involved in things like customs in your beat are going to be valuable when you try to get the things you want in our department. I tell you, some of the places we've used it in unusual ways are, we do what we call conversely either community call-ins or community customs. It's, I guess it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. But we take an occasion either when an area is hot or when it has been suppressed a little bit, and we bring officers out and we go walk the neighborhoods and tell the whole neighborhood what focus deterrence and what our actions have been and what they're all about. And we go knock on doors of people who are not involved in it, but are subject to it. You know, if a bullet goes through your window, you may never have been in a gang or had a kid in a gang, but it affects you. And we go out and we tell them what we're doing for the gang member that lives down the street, and what we're doing for the gang member who visits on Saturdays in the neighborhood. And we reach out to the whole community so they know what's going on. We also use what we've learned to respond to shots fired calls. I know there are some people in here that have access to technology to address shots fired that are unreported or they don't hit a body. We don't have that luxury yet, but we do get 911 calls. So every morning I have my crime analysis unit run shots fired calls from the night before, and we do sort of shots fired customs. We go out and we walk the neighborhood where the shots were fired. I expect the district officers in their supervision to go out and knock on doors and talk to people. Tell them we know what's going on. They know what's going on. If you have one person calling a shots fired, you have 20 people on the street that were affected by it. And we go out and tell them, here's what happened, here's what we're doing, we care about it, and here's what we're doing about the gangs that we think are involved. And we give sort of a generic custom notification as well.
Chief Fletcher, can you continue and share dosage? So dosage is something that comes up often. You don't want to, do too much because you don't want to weaken the effect of the message. But can you talk about dosage? How long have you been doing custom notifications in Chattanooga, and what does the dosage look like? Like, how many do you do in a given? Are you doing this every day? Are you doing this on a monthly basis? What does it look like?
Well, we are 1/50th the size of the population of Chicago, but we've done 50% as many customs.
By the way, just so you, the inside joke here is, I started all this. I started it by saying, like,
Hey, Chris, you got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Deb, you ready? Did you hear what he said? Randall, I'm sorry, Randall, you hear what he said? You got a lot of work to do. I started this. I always, and Rose is here from South Bend, friends from around the country, and I always tell folks when we come out, we talk with folks on peer visits and whatnot, that we in Chicago will do everything in our power to help make you the #2 city in the country. So this is my fault. I started this.
If it's not clear, I think we're all very passionate about customs because they combine what we think are the best qualitative and quantitative practices of not just good police work, but focused deterrence. So we like doing them. Dosage is something we're actually studying right now. We're working with the practitioners here at NSC to actually analyze that. We have one young man who was recently shot who had 7 contacts. So clearly he did not, he got the message, but he didn't receive the message. We talked about this last Friday, right? So it's something we're addressing, but I can tell you I would rather be in front of somebody too many times than not enough. Conversely, early in the year, and our technical support is in the back, and she'll tell you, we had 3 major acts of violence, 2 murders and 1 really bad shooting in about 10 days. And my team had been out actively trying to serve customs on the 3 victims within, in one case, 3 hours, and in the biggest stretch within 24 hours. We know who is at risk to be a victim or a perpetrator of violence. We know they need to hear the message. We need to get it to them. And nothing is more devastating as somebody who feels responsible for your community than to know you were trying to reach somebody that you knew was going to be hurt and you didn't reach them in time. One of those people was shot in front of one of my police officers. We tried to reach him. His mama wouldn't tell us where he was. 24 hours later, he's in a Waffle House. He gets shot in front of one of my police officers. Put the bad guys in jail.
Chief Tracy?
I think we can do more. Chris? I think we got to catch up to Chattanooga, but Chris and I have fun. He's passionate about the work that we do, and so are we in Chicago Police Department. Have a great partner as Chris Mallette and the National Network guys, and I always sing my praises for Tom Hurley and Deb Higgins in the back. They do unbelievable work, and a lot of successes that we are having in Chicago is because of these 3 people. And actually, we're going to have a new member in Chicago. So Chris already put your name out there several times. So welcome aboard. I think when we look at it, we're always going to go to the hot conflict. We identify the individuals that are involved in it, who the leaders of that gang. We know who they are from gang audits. From when we were having a gang issue and gang violence erupted in 2012. So it started getting ahead of us. We were getting all crime down, but the violent crime started spiking. So doing a gang audit, that's how we realized, we already knew we had 57 gangs, 57 parent gangs, but we thought at the time in 2012, we had 500 factions. After doing a gang audit, which is where you bring in the human intelligence, the beat officers, the detectives, the gang officers, the supervisors from a certain district, we're able to come up with 150 more factions in the city of Chicago. So that's 150 more factions that are competing for the same amount of turf or narcotic area. We saw the shootings go up. Having that intelligence, we were able to use that to get in front of our shootings and identify who those individuals are, where their turf is, and who they're in conflict with, to decide where we go for the hot conflicts, and immediately go after ones that are on parole or on probation or have a warrant. So that's how we can get in front of those initial conflicts, where we weren't getting in front of them before. We did a lot of good things in Chicago about gangs, but we didn't have a comprehensive plan across the city. Secondly, we went ahead with using Andy Papachristos from Yale, a professor from Yale, his social network analysis. And he originally came out with two degrees of association, or separation, as he called it, where you take 2 years' worth of murder victims, you look at the associates that were arrested with these murder victims, and you look at your associates' and through that analysis, you were able to prioritize a list who's going to be more likely to be a victim of shooting or murder or an offender. And we prioritized the list. And from there, we worked off on who the top 400 in the city, who we look at to custom notify. We actually, that was version 1. We had a grant that we're working, NIJ gave us a grant that RAND is actually evaluating. We're on version 3. And we take 9 variables. Now we've gone away from just an association with a murder victim and then separating to variables if this person's been shot, if he's been arrested with a gun, is he in a gang, his associations of people who have been shot in a gang or arrested with a gun or murdered. And because of those variables, our top 400 right now, I've said this before and I said at the last panel, there's 400 people over 500 times, some of them up to 800 times more likely than the average citizen in Chicago to be involved in violence, either a victim or an offender in a shooting. And we know out of the top 400, because we did a regression validation and went back a few years and used our last model, and we're going to version 4. We're getting more accurate with this because of the variables we're putting in it. We went back to find out with certainty 1 over 100 of those people in the top 400 are going to be a victim of shooting or an offender in shooting in the next 18 months. So it's the closest we can get to predict on these models just from the associations that they're in. So why not start there? And that's what we're doing. We're actually incorporating them into the custom notifications to make sure if we know that these people are involved, then we actually have an obligation to go out there and get ahead of it. Not to take away the discretion of what's happening in hot conflicts, and also coming back the intelligence information from the commanders of that district, because in CompStat we drive the accountability down, and then we allow them to make some decisions on that, in their local areas. I'm not going to take away that. I'm not going to take away that discretion of the commanders. I'm going to let them drive some things, but we're going to help them out with some statistical, empirical evidence. And that's how we're getting ahead of it. Next, we're doing juvenile notifications. That's next on our agenda. In the state of Illinois, now they moved the age up. Now it used to be under 17. Now it's under 18 to be a juvenile. These are some super hot kids that are committing a lot of that violence because the older gangbangers know that they're not going to go to jail in the juvenile justice system. So they use them. We got to get ahead of these kids, and we're actually using the same process because there are kids that are 15, 16 years old that are 500 times more likely to be a murder victim or a murder offender in Chicago from the analysis that we do. So our commanders have been asking for it. There's some legal liabilities that we looked at and we've gotten around it. We're working with Chicago Public Schools. Why aren't these kids in school? If they are in school, how can we infuse additional social services from the education process to make sure we can get them back in, or if they are in, we can get to them in the school and have other people, if it's not coming at home, the parental process of oversight, maybe the schools can help us out. We're looking at it. We're in the early stages, and Chris, we're going to be doing that very soon with the juveniles. We get the buy-in from most of our partners, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So that's where we're going next, and I think that's going to be probably the next topic to see what kind of success we're having that. And we can't custom notify the juvenile personally, but we can go to their guardians, and that's who we want to get to. And this is one where we don't even care if they're home. We don't really want them. We want to talk to the parents or their guardians. So those are the ways that we strategize in Chicago. Everybody has their methods, but we're fortunate enough to have a process in place through the social network analysis, which we call the strategic subject list in Chicago.
All right, you can see as the juvenile piece becomes highlighted now for us in Chicago, what we're seeing is a dynamic where the older group members are telling the younger group members, get your work in now. Get your work in now. I mean, go out and do you do the shootings, you do this, you do that, because there's the consequences won't be as severe upon you as they will be upon us. So as a result, that strategic subject list that the chief spoke about in Chicago with 400 members on there, 45, 50 of them are juveniles. You know, so that indicates we have to do something. We have to move on this. We have to get going, but more importantly, rather than moving fast, we want to make sure that we're moving right. We're doing it right, not just doing it fast, because there's a lot at stake. Chief Sumner, the question on dosage, and I know you guys have the domestics, you have now the shoplifting, but also the violent offenders. What does the dosage look like in the city of High Point for you?
And I'm going to answer that and a couple more things because I'm going to have to run. For us, we don't use it that often every month. It's maybe a couple of times a week. If we have an incident, there may be a dozen. So it just depends on the incidents. So fairly low for us compared to what we've heard, but we're a much smaller organization. I will tell you that there are some other things that we've done that's kind of different. I'll just throw these out here for you. Juvenile whose birthday makes him an adult, we did some birthday cards that amount to a custom notification, which is your reminder that now this is the first time that your juvenile record is in the past. You start with a clean slate. So I'm not above that. Run it right out of pistol. We did Christmas cards before Christmas break in the schools for some of our hot offenders, letting them know. Usually this is a period of time when activity increases. We've done some of that. That's a type of custom. Recently, we had a grant through the Governor's Crime Commission where we have 35 seats in a jobs training program specifically for gang members. So we did custom notifications, and we said, here's your custom notification, but it's also your personal invitation to one of those seats in that job training if you want it. First 35 get it. So it didn't always come with no actual offer. I mean, this time there was a concrete offer of help, and you'd be surprised how many have taken advantage of that. The one comment I got from a fellow that I think makes this worth it, I asked him, why would you do the things you've done? And he said to me, he looked me right in the eye and he said, it's easier to hurt somebody than it is ask for help. That's what he told me. But when you go to them, they don't have to come and ask you. When you're bringing it to their door, it was different. And then my funny story, sorry Chris to run it together, but Erica Johnson was one of our chronic shoplifters. She got a custom notification. She's been arrested 81 times by the High Point Police Department. So really I thought it was an exercise in futility, and we're just documenting the fact that she got the letter. We're listening to her jail calls the next day just to see. She calls a family member crying, I can't steal no more. When I get out, I'm going to have to stay home. I can't, the chief's done wrote me a letter, and I'm a habitual misdemeanor felon. She got it all messed up, but I can't do 24 months. I just can't do it no more, and she's crying. I wish I had time to play that tape for you. So that solidified it for me. In the most serious all the way down, we always assumed everybody knows what the rules are and they know what the consequences are, but some people don't. And you got to point it out to them, and there's some real value in several ways for doing that. So sorry to jet, but
No, thank you. I will point out the fact that we got ours starting in our humble beginnings in Chicago 2 years ago, once again from High Point, North Carolina. You know, so all this talk about Chicago, New York, and LA, if it's not New York, it's not LA, it's not important. High Point, Birmingham, Chattanooga, if it's not those, you know, you'd be amazed at what you could pull from each other and extract from each other. Let's give a round of applause for Chief Sumner on his way out. And we're gonna open the floor now for any questions. Do we have a microphone, or I think it's loud enough. It's good enough for the acoustics in here. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you to address about follow-ups, what the time frames are, like when you first do the initial custom, and how what we do, I don't know what they do in Chattanooga when they do follow-up custom notifications. When we go back to check.
Chris, why don't you explain what we do?
So in Chicago, we'll do follow-up notifications within about a 6-month period. So what we look for, you know, and it depends. Really, Chief Tracy touched on it. It gets to what conflicts are hot right now, who's hot right now. You see how this thing evolves. You know, we build it as we go. I'm not going to lie to you and say that, you know, I could say that we have this grand plan that we check off every time we've reached phase 2, we've reached phase 3. We're figuring it out as we go. What's working, what looks better, pulling in best practice, evidence-based. But we try to look for, if you go and do a custom notification, you need to be prepared within the next 6 months at the latest to get back at that individual and see where they are, remind them of the offer for help. That's something I don't think we really focused on enough, is the balance there. You know, it's not so much that what the threat of prosecution is, but it's also the threat of victimization, you know, and the offer for help in the midst of all of this. Chief Fletcher?
Ours is very similar. We have a, thank you, Chief. We do have a monthly assessment with our support and outreach team to look at the actual numbers about who is staying in case management and who is receiving services and who has fallen out, to make sure we address both individuals and any trends we're seeing.
Next question.
Again, Reagan Harmon from Oakland, California. A quick question about quality control for custom notifications. We do them in Oakland. We started with a small group of officers and feeling the need to expand. I think actually we may have expanded too soon. So just wanting, I've heard a couple of things about how do you ensure for quality control, but if there's anything that you may have left out that might be helpful.
Well, in Chicago,
No, go ahead, please.
in Chicago, we have a great team, and I've already hit on Chris and his team. They're at every single one. One of them are at it, and they're only 3, now going to be 4. But we're slowly trying to pull them out and train people from our CAPS office, Community Alternative Policing Strategy, and make sure that stakeholders, we get enough of them so they're all trained, and we make sure that they understand the message and they're giving the proper message at each one of those call-ins. That's why we're not doing as many as Chattanooga right now, because I don't know if it's a race, it's a quality control. We want to make sure, that we get that message right. It's not so much how many we're doing, but making sure we get that right message. And I always call it bastardizing the system if we do it too fast and the people are not have a correct understanding of what we're trying to do. And we want to push it down and have a great understanding, because it hits more focus, it hits more of our police officers that are out there engaging the community, engaging with parents and engaging with offenders and people that are in a little bit of distress, so they can have a better understanding what the long-term goals are that we're trying to do in the Chicago Police Department.
Right, so before Fred jumps in, Reagan, one of the things that we look at is our team is there for quality control. The messaging is coming from community members on the community side of the messaging. So the law enforcement has their half of the message, the community has their half of the message. We're there for quality control. One thing I will stress is this: you do have to look at situations as such as if it's a Latino gang member or Latina, and you're talking with the family members. Do you have the letter translated in Spanish? Do you have Spanish-speaking personnel there? Doesn't have to be everybody, but somebody should be if you're going to be notifying a Latino individual, or because you could end up with a family member and no one speaks Spanish. Also looking at the issue of race. Chicago is a city. Everything starts with race. Doesn't end with race, but it starts with race. You cannot, and I looked in, quick illustration of that, Englewood community, 7th Police District, a lot of violence going on, white police commander, white district intelligence officer, white ATF agent, white outreach person, white VRS person moderating. 5 white people knock on this guy's door in Englewood, about 100% black, maybe 102% black, knock on this guy's door and say, "We as the community are concerned. This is a true story. This guy does this." He looks to his right, and then he looks to his left. He's standing on his porch, and he says, "The community?" He said, "Shit, this looks like what y'all call a jury of my peers." So that woke us up a little bit. You need to be sensitive to that. We have 3 people, 4 now, 50% white, 50% black, but the community members that come out, we always look at who's the commander is, and it's a tough thing to say, but you have to consider it because you look at the cohort that you're engaging. I think David made a great point when he said the things we don't realize. I'm guilty of being callous not at crime scenes. I'm not hanging around crime scenes, but in those types of situations, because it's what we set up as a defense mechanism, as a mask to continue to do the work that my wife told me I'm PTSD. She said, "You got PTSD." She said, "You do. I know you need to go get some help." But you look at those things, and you have to consider them. So I would say quality control, look across the board. You're in Oakland. What are the relationships like? You do empower everyone. And once you get going and you start, we're 800 of these things into it. So people know Deb and Tom and Chris. They know who's coming out now. They know, but early on there is a process where you have to introduce people in a certain way into that community because the distrust is there to begin with. And you're partnering with law enforcement. So you have to have partners who are willing to get beyond, I'm a snitch, I'm for the police. You know what? No, I'm for peace is what I'm for. And I'm here as a prophet on a wall to try to offer you something as well. So those are some issues that we don't often really think about when we put it together. Do we have a person from this agency, this agency, this agency, and not understanding some of the cultural sensitivities that we have to have with the work that we do with our cohort? I'm sorry. Okay, Chief Fletcher.
We choreograph a custom almost as tightly as we do a call-in. It's very scripted, and we're very specific about what everybody should say, and then we use adult learning principles to scaffold that lesson down. We don't let anybody participate unless they've watched us do it, then they've done it side by side, then we've watched them do it. And we also don't send anybody out on their own. We do in some emergencies. If something happened and the only person to get there is a patrol supervisor, sometimes it's more important that they just get a message. But the vast majority of the time, we make sure that one of our core team members, which by the way is the exact same size as Chicago's, 4 people, we have Dr. Smith, our public safety director, Assistant Chief Arnold, and Captain Vaughn, and Lieutenant Cook.
Right.
And those are our 4 core, and we make sure that at least one of them is on there. If they can't be, we make sure one of our primary support and outreach people from our social services is there, so that there is some overlap. Occasionally we don't. We had to have a police officer, a police sergeant do one. We couldn't get anybody to the hospital before a guy got released, and it actually was very, very effective. And it was effective in changing that officer as well, but we try not to ever do that. We try to script it, scaffold it, and have somebody who is an expert involved in all of them.
And that was the first one, right? In the hospital?
No, this was actually just recently.
Okay.
It was just recently.
All right. I do have my
We do it
bill.
in the hospital all the time, though. Was that the question? We go to the hospital. We're at the hospital pretty much every time there's a shooting. We show up at the hospital usually with a packet in hand before they're released.
Right. Questions? Yes.
I'm Herbert Annie from Baton Rouge. Want to commend you guys on an informative presentation. My question is in regard to conducting the notices in the high schools or middle schools with the juveniles present. I was concerned about whether or not we should actually do that or not, because perhaps it could be misinterpreted as some type of custodial interrogation. Have you conducted any regarding the juveniles in the school systems, and have you had any negative feedback with parents calling you saying, hey, look, why did you talk to my child over at school today?
Marty's perfect for that, but we're just working through that. We're hoping to do that by the fall. And one of the things we're looking at is having an agent of the school there. They have the ability to have deeper conversations than an agent of law enforcement does. So that's one of the avenues we're pursuing. We haven't started implementing it again. We've got the first half. We've got the SROs out with the street crimes guys, learning the message with adults, and then we're going to figure out how to do that in the schools. But those are very, very good questions. What I would suggest you do is run it past your city legal before you do it. But there are avenues to do it, because Marty's doing it at his school, and I think, if I recall, we've talked with them a little bit, and I think the key there is having it be a school message. And the SROs have a lot more flexibility than a typical police officer does, because they're part of the school system and not a typical police officer.
And the way we're looking at it for the custom notifications, it's not going to be in the schools. We're going to go to the homes, go to the parents. But if we do have violence that we know might have originated in the school, because we do have conflicting gangs that go in schools, sometimes the violence starts outside, comes into the school. Sometimes it begins in the school and goes outside. We have a call every morning with Chicago Public Schools, and we have gang school safety teams. We have our operations people on the phone every morning. If we do see an erupting issue happening, we get the intelligence from in the school with the Chicago Public School safety officers, working in conjunction with our gang school safety officers. We have the ability to have a conversation with them in the schools in conjunction with Chicago Public Schools. So it's not necessarily a custom notification, but it's getting ahead of the violence, what I think works very well for us in the schools. Our customs is going to be a whole different operation. I would love to see how the other cities are doing it, if they can go into the schools and do those customs, and we might follow suit.
All right, so I would say tread very carefully. See what your Juvenile Court Act or the juvenile laws in Louisiana dictate. Run up the command to legal. Have great partners. A lot of it really comes down to relationships. You know, Chief Fletcher gave me a great idea when he talked about the SROs, because there's a lot of informal, because really customs are really kind of informal conversations, right? It's like I call it the honeymooner's intervention. You know, it's I know that you know that I know who you are, who you run with, who you're allied with, who you're beefing with, how you make your money, who's the most violent, who's the most aggressive, who got locked up, who got let out, who's posting what on Facebook. So, you know, like an old-fashioned kind of sit-down with your folks. You're not getting punished here or disciplined, but they're just letting you know they're well aware of your activities with your colleagues. But so the relationships are key. That's why we're actually focusing on, we're going to be targeting the parents and the guardians and not necessarily the individuals, because then that actually, because really if you go out on the normal custom, what does it look like? It looks like really community's the guest of law enforcement. Going to talk to guys who, these are not at-risk people, you know, per se, like at-risk youth. These are guys who, when you shake their hand, they may be transferring gunshot residue to your hand. They're in it. They're driving it, you know. So we're kind of the guests of the police. I tell my teams all the time, if they tell you to wear a vest, you know, because we don't know what they don't know when we knock on the door, you know, for everyone who's going out. The juvenile piece, we're taking a slightly different approach as we evaluate it, where it's really the community's leading the custom because of the concern for the livelihood and the safety. And, you know, did you know that your son or your nephew is 300 times more likely to be the victim of violence because, not because he's the driver, but because of the group and the network that he's in. That has a profound effect on folks. You know, so whether he's there or not, you're getting the message out, and those influentials begin to weigh in on the lives of the individuals, be it nagging, be it monitoring, be it whatever it may be. But I would say for Baton Rouge, you know, do tread carefully, get some solid counsel on that. And if we could be helpful, please let us know.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're past 3:30. If you have any more questions, we could take one more question, or we could just close it out. It's up to you. Or if you have any specific questions, how about we do this? You could come in and inquire of the panel. All right, let's have a round of applause for our panelists.